All right, welcome back to our third video on Ethics, a very short introduction, chapter 1. What we're talking about here are going to be problems presented to ethical theorizing by human nature. I think we should just jump right in and we'll work our way through for the 4 challenges we're going to see here. So the first challenge we're going to focus on here is egoism. Egoism suggests that people are intrinsically selfish. In fact, we know this to be somewhat true, right? People tend to look out for their own benefit. And in fact, we might say that even apparently altruistic behaviors are meant for their own benefit. We can all think of people, for instance, or maybe corporations, right, that give large amounts of money to charity for the purpose of looking charitable. Right? We can think of people who stop to help people for the purpose of looking helpful. Right? They don't actually care about doing the right thing. They care about being perceived as doing the right thing. Now, if this is a fundamental feature of human cognition, we might be in trouble. If nothing else, it seems to eliminate that moral motivation element that we talked about in the last lecture, right? If all you care about is yourself, at the very least, the best kind of motivation you could ever have is self-regarding. That is, you just want to do better for yourself. But that seems like a very minimal and potentially diseased ethic, right? That's a very warped moral system, and it isn't what we're typically talking about. In fact, that kind of selfishness is often perceived to be fundamentally immoral. So one challenge is going to be whether or not human beings are capable of being concerned about the well-being of anyone but themselves. And if they're not, trying to figure out if that allows any room for a substantial ethics anymore. Our next challenge is the challenge of determinism or causal determinism. You might think about this also, you might have heard the phrase free will. This is a fundamental question here. In most contexts, free will is taken to be a precondition of moral responsibility. That is, you have to be able to choose to do something or not do it to be responsible for it. Obviously, you wouldn't be responsible for hitting someone if I took your arm and whacked them with it, because you had no control over that. Arguably, you wouldn't be responsible for, say, stealing something from the grocery store if I had, tied a bomb around your foot and said, do that or else I blow you up, right? Clearly, you're under such duress, you're not really responsible for that sort of thing. Likewise, we tend to say that people who suffer from certain kinds of mental disorders are not responsible for their actions. Again, we find that because they didn't have the freedom to choose in the normal, typical, whatever that means, way, they're not really responsible. Well, funny thing, if I knock one domino over, it will hit the next one, and the next, and the next, and the next. I know this. I know this because the behavior of the physical world, at least at the macro level, that is above the level at which quantum mechanics kicks in, which is very, very, very small, all of that appears to be deterministic. And in fact, while there are certain interpretations of quantum mechanics that suggest the quantum world may be indeterministic, even those suggest that at some point the world appears to become deterministic. Well, if that's right, if the world is deterministic, then, well, we seem to be in some trouble. Because all of the actions you're currently taking were pretty much predestined. You're just the middle domino being knocked over. That domino doesn't choose to fall one way or the other, or to fall or not. And this would seem to indicate that if you are just another piece, right, a billiard ball on the pool table, a domino being whacked, you're not really responsible for your choices, nor am I, nor is any human. If the world we live in is deterministic in such a way that our actions and choices are determined for us by the physical world around us, then we do not seem to be capable of being morally responsible, at least in the typical way. Now, on the other hand, imagine we have radical indeterminism, and that the world is chaotic or indeterminate in some way. This also seems to make us not able to really be responsible for things. If the factors that contribute to your choosing are just rolling a die, right? Something spinning a wheel in your head. You're not really responsible for that chaotic outcome either, right? So you and I are walking down the street, my mental die rolls, your mental die rolls, and yours comes up, don't steal that car, and mine comes up, steal that car. But our dice were the same. Why am I more guilty than you? I didn't really choose to do it, it was just caused by a die roll. So what we need to see is some way to put moral responsibility back into the heads of humans, or to develop a system of moral responsibility that is able to withstand the challenges of determinism and or indeterminism as we see appropriate for the world. Our next challenge is the challenge of unreasonable demands. We all are familiar with things like you shouldn't lie, right? That's a pretty good moral rule. But most people lie. And in fact, it might be just unreasonable to ask you to never lie. But let's say that one, okay, fine, sure, yeah, that's fine. I can theoretically never lie. I could actually never lie. What if I said don't harm, don't cause harm? Another good moral rule, almost certainly impossible to follow, right? Something you're going to do one day will hurt someone. Often by accident, right? You'll bump into them, they'll twist their ankle. It happens. Did you do wrong? That seems rough. Now, this is going to come up more clearly when we have a sort of system of moral rules in front of us, right? Respect your mother and father. Fourth commandment, right? That seems like the fourth commandment. I feel like that's the fourth commandment. Anyway, of the Judeo-Christian 10 Commandments. Is it possible to always be respectful? Probably not. I mean, anyone who thinks that's the case has never been a teenager. At some point, as a teenager, you'll probably be disrespectful to your parents. Not necessarily because you're trying to, but because that period of one's life is one in which that's a very normal behavior. It's very typical. It's expected, and in fact, it's part of growing. So many systems of morality are going to give us what might appear to be unreasonable demands. And they're unreasonable particularly in light of a principle called ought implies can. This principle suggests that for it to be true that we normatively ought to do something, it must be the case that it is possible for us to do something. However, we cannot all be saints. So if it's good for us to do something, or we ought to be a kind of saint, right? Well, then it would seem to require that we are all capable of that, but it doesn't seem psychologically true. A way to put this in context in a less abstract way is to think about a grading system. If I were to grade my students on how high they could levitate off the floor at the end of the semester, this would be a terrible system. Primarily because it is physiologically and physically impossible for my students to do so. So what I'm grading them on is something they could never possibly do. That is, I'm saying they ought when they can't. Likewise, for morality, if we're going to say you ought to always choose the best choice or something, that's not psychologically realistic, and that appears to go beyond what human nature is capable of. Think back to our challenge of egoism, and you'll see an interesting connection here. If human beings are not capable of being anything but selfish, then saying that they ought not be selfish is silly, and you cannot base a morality on that. So this is one thing we're going to have to keep in mind very specifically when we think about human nature and ethics is whatever ethical principles we give, because we are focusing here on ethical principles for human behavior, right? Not for robot behavior. We're worrying about human right and wrong. Then we need to be aware of the nature of humans and what they are capable of achieving, not just physiologically, but psychologically. Are they capable of having the kind of disposition or mindset that you are requiring them to have? The final challenge we're going to address here is one that is briefly mentioned by your textbook, and that is the challenge of moral luck. Imagine two drunk drivers driving down the road. Same road, one day after the other. The first night, one of them, he swerves off, jumps the curb, comes back down, it's all fine. No one's hurt, no one saw, they get home, no big deal. The next night, different driver, same part of the road, hops the curb, exact same angle, everything's the same. Except, tonight, there was a family on the curb waiting for the bus. And when they hopped the curb, they killed them. That person seems to have done something worse, in a sense. But their actual behaviors and choices were identical. This is called moral luck. Imagine, again, that someone takes a gun and points it at me and they pull the trigger. Now imagine that the gun jams. Now they've got attempted murder. Imagine the gun doesn't, and they shoot me, and I die. Well, now they've got murder. Or, heck, they shoot me and I don't die. I live purely out of luck. That's still attempted murder, and there does still seem to be something different about trying to kill someone and failing and trying to kill someone and succeeding in a moral sense. Now, there's an additional wrinkle we can put on this concept of moral luck that your book doesn't discuss, and this is called constitutive luck. When you talk about what constitutes something, we talk about the way it is made up. So constitutive luck is the way that a person is made. Think, for instance, of a psychopath, right? Someone who is not normally connected to moral sentiments. Well, is it their fault that they're that way? Not really. And if their actions, even morally despicable ones, are based off of the way they are, and they're not responsible for that, are they really responsible for their final behaviors? And this goes back to showing another case where morally significant factors appear beyond our control. The way the world is, the way it reacts to us, is certainly beyond our control. And in fact, the kind of person we are may also be beyond our control. If that's the case, then all the moral outcomes appear to be nothing more than luck. And a moral system that penalizes you for having bad luck or rewards you for having good luck seems to be a very weak moral system. So this is our last challenge for human nature, which is that a lot of the aspects of human nature which determine how we behave, what sorts of things happen, what sorts of actions we take, and the way the world reacts to them are out of our control. Collectively, these challenges should highlight the importance of coming to a clear idea of human nature as we formulate an ethics, which is probably not something we're going to be successful on in just a few weeks, but is something to keep in mind, that your moral system does need to be sensitive in certain ways to the kinds of things that you're talking about, humans, the kinds of entity you're trying to govern, right? They need to be accurately represented in your moral system. Likewise, the features of human cognition and psychology are going to be fundamentally important to us as we move through our understanding of morality. With that, that is the end of our first chapter on ethics. I hope you found it enjoyable, and I look forward to our talk next week. See you then.